until the trial is completely over. Once you are told to begin deliberations and the case is submitted to you, you can discuss the case amongst yourselves only. That we can do to resolve these issues, we will certainly do that for you. Rules and trial procedure. Rules exist in every trial that bind the conduct of the attorneys. After evidence presentation is completed, closing arguments will occur, and attorneys are permitted to argue what the evidence has or has not established. Closing arguments are not evidence and are merely designed to assist you in evaluating that evidence.
I'd like to approach Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Counsel, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As you heard this morning, Mr. Starkey is charged with several offenses, 3 counts of kidnapping and 2 counts of rape among the most serious. You'll hear that these events took place over the course of 2 days, August 7th and August 8th, 2013. You will also hear that there was one victim, Krista Connor. Krista will tell you that back in 2012, she met the defendant, Kyle Starkey. They started dating. Their relationship progressed. Eventually, they moved in together. Now, at the time, Krista was living in her mother's house. You'll hear it was a 3-story house, a basement, a main floor, and an upstairs. And Krista had the bedroom upstairs that she and Kyle shared. Kyle was working at that time at the McDonald's in Wooster. They lived in Wooster at this time. They still do. That one day, August 7th, she recalls, she went to pick Kyle up from work. He wanted to stop on the way home to get something to drink. So they stopped. He bought a 6-pack of beer, brought it back to the house. They went upstairs to their room. Kyle was talking about wanting to take a vacation, looking online about going places, drinking his beer, and watching television. Krista was laying on the sofa, or on the bed, rather. And she'll tell you that as she was laying on the bed listening to him, that he drank those beers, what she will describe as rather quickly. That when he finished with the beers, he told her he wanted to have sex. She told him that she didn't want to have sex, and she didn't want to be treated like a sex slave. She will tell you that he then came over to where she was laying on the bed, got in the bed beside her, put his arm around her neck, and choked her until she passed out. She'll tell you that she awoke to him beating her about the head. She'll tell you that he told her at that point on, she had to do what he said. At some point during this time, she'll tell you he picked up a knife and pointed it to her throat and threatened to kill her. He threatened to cut her up into little pieces and put her in the lake. He put a dog toy in her mouth, put her over the back of the bed, and beat her with a bow. He was making a bow and arrow and had the stick from the bow. He grabbed it and beat her on the buttocks with it until her buttocks were black and blue. He then forced her to put a vibrator in her buttocks. She panicked and defecated on herself. He also insisted that she perform oral sex. Once she had the accident and defecated on herself, he led her into the bathroom to clean herself up. Again, berating her, telling her how ugly she was, how terrible this was, hitting her. And she'll tell you how she looked at herself in the mirror and how he made her look in the mirror and look at her face and how injured it was. And then he started telling her nobody could see her like that. That if her mother came home and saw her looking like that, he'd have to kill both of them. Because nobody could see what he had done. And she'll tell you that she decided that she had to do something to settle him down. That they went back in the bedroom he again had the knife to her, threatening to stab her and kill her, and asked her if there was any last thing she wanted. And she suggested they smoke marijuana because she thought it would calm him down. And so they did. And they continued to talk, and she continued to try and settle him down, and he continued to talk about how terrible it would be if somebody came home and found them together and found what she looked like, and she was bleeding at this point. And she was wiping the blood on the furniture to get it off her hands, and he was telling her to stop leaving evidence around. And then eventually, she convinced him she didn't have to die, that they could just go away. And so they decided, or he agreed, to leave the house. And they decided to come to Geneva-on-the-Lake. She'll tell you about that drive from Geneva-on-the-Lake at knife point, because he took the knife with him, she'll tell you. And how they got to Geneva-on-the-Lake and checked into Diane's poolside motel, and then went down to look at the lake, and he told her that she had to go stand on the rocks so that they could go look at the lake on the rocks. And that while she was there, she had her phone, and she took a picture. And she'll tell you she posted that picture so that if she didn't come back, people would know the last place she was. Because when they were down on that rock, she'll tell you that he continued to threaten to cut her up and put her in the dark lake where nobody would see her. That after a while, they left the rocks, came back toward the arcade in Geneva-on-the-Lake, and spent the evening in Geneva-on-the-Lake. They ended up at one of the local bars that he was familiar with. She'll tell you, in all honesty, she had some drinks at the bar. He told her she had to. She stayed with him at the bar, and she'll tell you she stayed because she felt like she had no choice, that if she left, he'd find her and kill her. She'll tell you she spoke to some people at the bar, that she tried to tell them what was going on, but they didn't believe her. And she'll tell you that eventually they left the bar and went back to the hotel. And that when they got back to the hotel in Geneva-on-the-Lake, again, he insisted on having sex. And this time, she asked to go in the bathroom first. And while she was in the bathroom, he came in, grabbed her by the hair, dragged her back out onto the floor, and proceeded to sexually assault her. And she will describe to you in detail what was done to her that night, too. And she'll tell you that he insisted that she perform oral sex on him. And then in the process of her performing oral sex on him, that he finally passed out. And that she was so terrified to leave that she stayed that night. And that the next day they went back to Wooster. And that they stayed together that afternoon in Wooster until she could get him to work. And that evening, she finally took him back to his job so that he could go to work that night. And that once he was out of the house and once he was at work, she told her mother, who was home, what happened to her. And she'll tell you that she packed up his clothes and she took him to a friend's house. And she'll tell you that she was so afraid after what had happened to her the day before and that day that she didn't call the police. She didn't tell them. She told her mother, and a couple days later she told one of her best friends. And they took pictures. And you'll see the pictures of the bruise on her face, and the bruise on her shoulder, and the bruises on her buttocks that were taken a few days after this assault occurred. And you'll hear that as time went on, that eventually Krista got to the point where she felt safe. And she did call the police. And she did report it to the Wooster Sheriff's Department. And you'll hear from the officer who went to her house, and you'll hear from the detective who will be here tomorrow to tell you about Wooster's investigation. And that once they learned that part of this crime occurred here in Ashtabula County, that they brought it to the Ashtabula County Sheriff's Department for them to investigate. and you'll hear from Detective Sean Ward of the Ashtabula Sheriff's Department, who also tried to look into this back in 2015. And once you've heard all of the evidence, and you've heard from Krista, and you've seen the pictures, and you've heard from her mother and the officers, we'll be back asking you to return a verdict of guilty on all counts.
Fishing or sleeping like me. Anyway, I do say that on behalf of my client and myself, and that's no matter what verdict you return. Obviously, we hope at the end of the evidence you'll return a not guilty verdict, but no matter what you return, we will respect it. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation before. I know I have. How do you prove a negative? This case is going to be, how does the defendant prove a negative? You're accused of something. You're not going to have DNA. The alleged victim that supposedly saw this, and what you're going to have to do is believe her story. To find my client guilty, you're going to have to buy into her story. Now, what we would ask you to do, we believe this case started back in December of 12, when the defendant, my client, moves in with the alleged victim, Krista Connor, and he's living there. And of course, he's the one working. No DNA. You're not going to have witnesses other than the alleged victim that supposedly saw this. What you're going to have to do is believe her story. He works at McDonald's, which is about a mile from where they were living. Goes and works third shift every day. And of course, he walks to work, didn't have a license, walk to work, walk back home most of the time. Now, on this particular day, when the defendant came home early that morning, his girlfriend, the evidence will tell you that she was a clutter.
Objection, and we would ask for a sidebar.
Sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've never been accused of being anything but a loudmouth, so I appreciate that. Whoever said he could hear me, if you couldn't, I'll speak up. So as I was saying, Kyle, the defendant, comes home and he sees, you'll hear from Kyle as to what exactly she was doing. Kyle goes down into the bathroom, get some gauze and whatever, and at this point you'll hear Kyle say, you know, I decided that this was enough of this and I was going to leave her. He was done with it. It was over. He's down, bandages are up and whatever, gets some things, helps her. And at that point, he decides, well, you know, maybe we ought to go to Geneva-on-the-Lake. He's going to let her down gently, he'll tell you. I'm just going to drop it on her. He's done. It's finished. He says, we'll go to Geneva-on-the-Lake. So they end up going to Geneva-on-the-Lake. And he'll explain to you exactly how they got there. She drove, went down to the lake, how they went to a bar, went to an arcade. The whole day is going to explain to you. Now remember, you heard in opening statements from the prosecutor that this woman saw people at a bar. You'll hear testimony that she saw people at a bar. Supposedly, she's going to tell you that all these pictures she's beat up, got black and blue marks on her, and all this other stuff, but no one sees her. You're not going to have one person, not one person at Geneva-on-the-Lake on August the 7th come in here and tell you that they saw her in a condition that she had marks on her, bruises on her, contusions on her, or lacerations. Not one person. I want you to think about that. If you've ever gone to Geneva-on-the-Lake, been down to Eddie's Grill, or been down to the arcade or Madsen's Donuts in August, there's always people there. She's going to tell you, like she just said, they walked on the beach. Again, supposedly at knife point. And what does she do? Does she tell anybody? You won't hear one witness come in here and say, oh yeah, I saw her. She was all beat up. He had a knife on her. Remember, you're going to hear testimony that she lived on Barnes Road. I believe it's Wooster, somewhere near there. And supposedly, if you want to listen to the prosecutor, what the testimony tells you, he walked her out of the house with a knife to her throat. Neighbors, this isn't a farm community where there's a house 30 miles away or 3 miles away. There's houses next to each other, you'll hear. And he's got a knife on her the whole time. And she doesn't go to the police, drives all the way from Wooster to Geneva-on-the-Lake. You'll hear it's about a 2 to 2.5 hour drive. She's driving, and he has this knife to her, never pulls over, never goes to the police station. She's got a cell phone, does nothing to stop this. So she goes to the bar, as she will tell you, and she drinks. Doesn't tell the bartender. You're not going to have the bartender come in here and tell you, oh, I saw her, she was all beat up, she had marks on her face, her shoulders. You're not going to hear any of that. It doesn't happen. She tells no one. You're also going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, the testimony will be that that bar where they were at is about 2/10 of a mile from the police station at Geneva-on-the-Lake. And lo and behold, what you're finally going to hear after you get all of this together and put it all together, you're going to hear just what she told you. We agree with her. He falls asleep supposedly in a motel room. That's what her story is. He falls asleep after taking marijuana, and she's afraid to leave. Sleeps there all night. She's afraid to leave while this guy's sleeping. This is someone that the prosecutor would have you believe testimony that he beat the living daylights out of her within an inch of her life, threatened her mother, and yet she has every opportunity the whole day to leave, get help, and doesn't do it. Absolutely does not do it. I'm going to tell you, I want you to listen closely to the beating supposedly about, she's going to tell you that he had to put the dog's ball in her mouth and made her give oral sex and all kinds of things. You're going to hear some preposterous things. Preposterous. I want you to listen very closely to it, because I think you'll agree with me at the end of it that it was absolutely impossible. This case is nothing more, sadly enough, than a woman scorned. That's what it's all about. And it could have been a male. I'm not here saying it was just because it was a woman. Could have been a man done the same thing. But she's scorned, she's mad, she's upset. So how does she strike back? She strikes back by accusing him of doing all these egregious things. So ladies and gentlemen, what I would ask you to do is listen to the evidence very closely. And as I ask you my very few questions, or when I did voir dire, use your common sense that each and every one of you have, that you brought through that door. And I believe, firmly believe, that when this case is concluded, you will agree with me that there's not enough evidence to bring a conviction on any charge in this case. And we're going to ask you to return a not guilty verdict. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Purdue. All right, so council's finished with their opening statements.